Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Mark Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Mark helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Mark draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Mark Bautis. On today's episode, we brought back the entire Bautis Financial team to discuss the second book we read for our book club. Today's book we're going to talk about is The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. John, Kira, and Kayla, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
All right, so last month's book we talked about was Atomic Habits by James Clear, which I picked. Kira picked the one we're going to talk about today, The Infinite Game. So, Kira, I'll have you start off with leading the discussion. Why'd you pick this book?
I selected our next read, The Infinite Games by Simon Sinek, and I picked this off the shelves at Barnes & Noble's about a year ago. I was intrigued by the front end paper, which reads in part, "How do you win a game that has no end? Finite games, according to James P. Carse, have known players, fixed rules, and a clear endpoint. The winners and losers are easily identified, like in a game of football or a game of chess. In infinite games, like businesses or politics or life itself, the players come and go, the rules are changeable, and there is no defined endpoint. There are no winners, no losers in an infinite game. There is no such thing as a winning business, for example, or winning life. There's only ahead and behind." And I thought this would be a good selection for our Bautis Financial book club because these discussions are happening in this book club with my coworkers, my team, and at large, the book's main goal is to challenge the way that we look at the responsibility of businesses and our responsibility to employees. So my first question to ask the team today is for John. In chapter 1 of the book, Simon says that any leader who wants to adopt an infinite mindset must follow 5 essential practices. The first is to advance a just cause. And by advancing a just cause, you should feel inspired to wake up every morning, get going. And so I wanted to ask you if you could share a just cause that you have in business or one that you have in your personal life.
It was interesting that you, this was one of the questions that you would ask me because I think that this is one of the things that was the most thought-provoking for me when reading this book, thinking about, how I set up my goals and I have goals and really just kind of unpacking how I've thought about the things that motivate me. And I don't know if I have the one at a personal level really figured out. I think right now with 4 kids, there's no infinite game. It's more of a finite game to get through the day. And I joke about that, but at the same time, I think that a lot of, what I think about is obviously my family, like being able to do everything that I possibly can and keeping them, obviously is my highest priority. I don't know if I have necessarily figured out what I guess that higher meaning, that higher purpose. It almost reminded me of the advice value stack that we talk about with our clients. You have those things that are that fulfilling a life's purpose. And it's certainly something that I've given a lot of thought to since reading this book, because I'm not sure that I quite have that, wake up in the morning and life's purpose, I'm moving in this type of direction, but it definitely makes sense. And it definitely seems like something that everybody could benefit from by, just continuing to look at what that is and just try to, maybe it could take you a really long time to figure out what it is, but at least moving in that direction at a personal level, I think would be something that I definitely, for me, is something that I want to continue to work on for sure. From a business perspective, it's a little different, right? Because then, there's me and then there's our business. So, and again, back to that value stack, I think one of the things that I really enjoy about this job is just helping people to have confidence. I always think about when I'm meeting with someone, just building confidence with as many people as possible is really one of my approaches, and one of the things that really helps in me kind of keeps me motivated and like you were saying, waking up in the morning and excited about the job is like the prospect of being able to help someone, from the beginning of the meeting towards having a lot more confidence at the end of the meeting versus the beginning of the meeting, and just in confidence across all levels of their financial life. So, I think that's one of the main things that I think about when it comes to from a business perspective.
I think this book was like thought-provoking in that way. And I agree with you. Like for me, I definitely like want to leave a legacy. But then you're like, what is that legacy? And it's like thought-provoking in that way. It's like, okay, I really need to sit down, put pen to paper. And I know a lot of people also call this like your quote unquote why. What is your why? It's like a popular, self-reflecting tool that you can use. So I think it was effective in that way.
Didn't he have a book that was
Start with Why? I think.
Start with Why.
Yeah.
Funny enough, like that's actually I think one of his first ones, or if it wasn't his first one.
So it's worth mentioning the second essential practice that Simon lays out in the book, which is building a trusting team. But my next question for Mark relates to the third practice, which is study your worthy rivals. It is important to note that Simon does caution that worthy rivals are different from competitors. He says viewing other companies or other individuals as competitors is unhealthy. If you have a competitor at work, it means you will do what you can to undermine them to improve whatever it could be for you, whether it's your sales or getting the bonus. But for Mark, in your opinion, what differs a worthy rival from a competitor?
Yeah, I think he gives a lot of good stories about this. One of them was he talks about Wells Fargo and some of the unethical things they did, or you want to say they did or they were forced to do or encouraged to do. I grew up playing a lot of sports and always looked at the person on the other side of the field as a competitor. I think that kind of mindset transitioned into business as well, especially, when starting this company, looking at other advisors as, oh, it's competition, it's a kill or be killed or world where we're always, looking at this finite pot. Sinek takes a different approach. He defines it's not, you shouldn't look at them as competitors. You want to look at a worthy rival. It's another player in the game who's worthy of comparison. And what he says, it may be players in the industry, outside the industry. They may be sworn enemies, collaborators, colleagues. But regardless of who they are, the main point is that they do something just as good or maybe even better than we do. They may make a superior product, command greater loyalty, lead more efficiently or effectively. You don't need to admire everything about them, agree with them, or even like them. You should, simply acknowledge that they do have strengths and abilities, and you probably could learn from them. So, and that's what he talks about with study your worthy rivals. One of the things that I've done is, like I said, previous mindset years ago when I first started was just to look at everyone as a competitor. We recently joined a group of advisors that meets regularly, shares best practices. It's called Advisors Growing as a Community. So it's advisors from all across the country who are not necessarily even competitors, but it's a way that, maybe this other advisor does something better than we do, and we can, always in that quest of improving ourselves, we can attain, whether it's some different strategy or some different way of approaching, how we operate as advisors. So I think even before reading this, it was something where I've had a mind, little shift in how I looked at it, because I do think now, studying or taking, this person does this really good, so I pick something up from there. Maybe another person does something else really well. So I think it is kind of picking and choosing, not necessarily emulating, but really learning from the people that are in the same space we are.
Yeah, and I also liked the example of Apple. I think it was Apple and Microsoft, how they had competing products, but Apple was so focused on their just cause of improving the world and the planet that they didn't care about sales over Microsoft on a similar product. It was more so looking at the bigger picture of the entire company.
Yeah, I think the other example he uses too, which I liked a lot, was GE under Jack Welch, where basically Welch, like he ranked everyone and at certain periodic times during the year, if you were in the bottom, you got let go. It wasn't, try to, see how this teammate could contribute to the team. It was this real harsh way of creating that competitor environment.
Yeah. Okay. Next question's for you, John. Have you ever come away from a customer service experience feeling like your needs could have been met without much hassle, but were denied as part of a company policy, or that's impossible because our company doesn't allow that? Simon says that this only happens in poorly led companies, and that a well-led company knows what the rules are and when to break them when it's the right thing to do. Can you give me an example of when you've quote unquote broken the rules, and did it pay off for you?
The first thing that popped into my mind was Comcast. They're a unique company where I don't want to say they're necessarily a monopoly, but until recently, you didn't have a lot of places to go. And I feel like every time I have interaction with Comcast, very rarely is it a positive experience. And it always ceases to amaze me. It never ceases to amaze me, I should say, that the person that's in touch with the client, whenever those situations come up, how important it is for you to leave a positive experience behind for that person, because they have choices. And there's just very, very simple things that come along with that positive experience. But with that said, I have to say that I had a lot of trouble unpacking a lot of what he was talking about when it comes to the infinite game. I guess the best way to explain that for me was my difficulty is that, there's a lot of these tactics you may so there's good customer service. There's these things. So I think it's possible where you could have a company that has, this infinite mindset, but they have poor customer service. I don't know. I think that there's an oversimplification of the way of his approach with what you're talking about and a lot of the things that are there. So I had a little trouble wrapping my head around what he was trying to get at and how it related to the infinite game. Because at the end of the day, to me, there's good business practice and there's bad business practice. And when it comes to customer service, you can call the one, you could maybe tie the good business practice into the infinite, an infinite mindset. But I don't know if they're always going hand in hand. I don't have a specific case where I have example of like you said, where I've broken the rules, but I can say in my experience that it would make sense that infinite mindset would in most cases kind of trickle down to the people who are in contact with the consumer on a regular basis.
I like how the Ritz-Carlton approaches it. They give any employee of the company the authority, and I think it's up to $1,000 or $2,000 to improve the client experience or the customer's experience any way they want. So they have complete authority to do anything that they think will help, up to a certain amount. But I think that's really a good thing, because compared to actually yesterday I saw on Twitter where someone posted a thread where they said, U-Haul, the company, is garbage. Let's list other companies. And you wouldn't believe the amount of people that posted. It ran from everything from, there were some airlines mentioned, there was Comcast mentioned, and now people have a voice. Where it used to be you got bad service and you just dealt with it, and now depending upon how big your Twitter list is or your Instagram followers, a lot of people will see if you have a problem. And what's even funnier in that thread is the companies actually came on the thread and started posting, oh, if you had a bad experience, DM us, or here's our service line. And people were like, nah, you had a chance and you failed, and now this is what you're getting from it. So and I think Kira, to your point on the question is, I think Sinek talks a lot about who the focus is of the company. And, I think previously or in the finite mindset, it's the shareholders, right? Everyone thinks, oh, it's to make money, it's the shareholders. But he talks about how, like Apple, they focused on the experience of the customer. They focused on the customer. And, the other one that, maybe we'll talk about a little bit later is the employees of the company as well, and how important it is focusing on them. But yeah, I think the mindset either has or should shift to that, to really focusing on those aspects.
Yeah, and for me, like, I, on a broad scale, view an infinite business as one that's like always adapting and willing to adapt. And I feel like that plays a lot into customer service. I've worked a lot in like service industries, at restaurants, at stores. I've also worked a lot on social media. So I've been, the people on the account saying, please reach out to us if you've had a bad experience. And I think just having that adaptability to not stay within like a rule book of, oh, if someone asks this question, we have to say no. Or if someone wants a booth, we have to say no, there's only tables available, or your party's not big enough, like as a small example. So I feel like even if it's as little as breaking a rule of like, oh no, we're not supposed to see anyone in that section because there's no server there, we just tap the shoulder of someone who's a server that's our friend and say, hey, do you think you can help this couple? One of them is handicapped and they can't get into the main part of the restaurant. So little things like that I do think go a long way, especially when you're consumer facing. And after all, a business can't succeed without a consumer. So my next question is for you, Mark. At the conclusion of the book, do you feel inspired to adopt an infinite mindset? And I guess you can talk a little bit about how you felt about the book in general. If you had any agreement or disagreement, sort of like John just mentioned, feel free to.
Yeah, so I think the Sinek talks about the 5 essential practices of having that infinite mindset. And I think some of them definitely did resonate. Like I talked earlier about the study your worthy rivals. He also talks about advancing a just cause. Like John, it's still a different mindset of me to kind of pinpoint. I think the closest one that I have to that is, really pushing out financial literacy. That's something I think that we really try and do as a company, with some of the content we do, but also I'm a big believer, that we don't get financial literacy growing up. And it is a passion of mine to help with that. He talks about building trusting teams, which like I was just mentioning how Jack Welch made competition amongst teams. But you really, realize how important the team is, how important everyone on the team is. And Sinek gives some really good stories about that. One I liked, he talked about the Marine Corps. What he said about the Marine Corps is they really try and identify leaders. And, they give different assessment tests that they do. On the assessment test, it's not the ability to succeed, which they say makes a leader. It's showing characteristics of a leader. And those characteristics could be honesty, integrity, judgment, decisiveness. For example, he says the Marine Corps is not interested whether, someone can cross a water hazard. They want leaders to create a trusting environment so that they can cross any water obstacle. So, I think like having, that really opened my eyes to how really to look at leading a team and, how we want to develop our, the team members that we have here on it. And, he contrasts that with, what I mentioned earlier about Wells Fargo and how they just create, and he calls it ethical fading is what he calls it, and how they create a culture of it and how quickly, a negative culture like that can develop to the point where, 3 million, Wells Fargo opened 3 million fake accounts over a period of time, and how, there's evidence that it wasn't like it was just some small practice, that there were a lot of people aware of this, and you can almost look at it as this negative behavior was promoted. So, I think it's definitely, after reading the book, it's definitely something. Having the infinite mindset versus the finite mindset is something that I think is something that we're trying, we're going to try and do, and definitely enjoy the book. I do think, Sinek, it's, he gives the 5 practices. He somewhat simplifies some of it. Like, for example, we'll talk about with people we work with saving, right? And we'll say, you should save more. And it's like, yeah, that's great, but how do I actually do it? That's probably the one part I would have liked to see a little more in there. He gives some really good stories, but kind of that, okay, this is how you kind of take that infinite mindset. And he does give some stories. He gives some examples of it, but I'm always one of that. Here's the playbook. Here's the roadmap on how to actually, take that. But overall, I thought it was a good book.
Yeah. Kayla, for you, so the last of the 5 essential practices is cultivating the courage to lead. I wanted to ask if you got any good, valuable information from that section that could inspire you to become a leader or lead in your own life.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting question. I think within your own life, it's kind of hard to pinpoint that why, like we talked about earlier. I don't know my why, and I don't think there's anything wrong with not knowing that, but just knowing that you're working towards something bigger is kind of that infinite mindset that Sinek is talking about. So that's kind of how I took away with it. Another thing that I took away was that Mark already mentioned competitors, but one of the things is that like within your game, you're your own biggest competitor, and you shouldn't be comparing yourself to colleagues or others around you. You should just be comparing you to yourself. And then the last thing that I think I'm taking away to my own life is that in a finite game, you're worried about small consequences, but in an infinite game, you're not really letting those hold you back.
Is there anything that you disliked or disagreed with that Simon wrote about in the book?
I thought it was really entertaining the whole way through. I think one criticism that I do have is that it feels some of the stories felt a bit redundant. Like we would just switch companies. You guys already mentioned Wells Fargo, Apple versus Microsoft. And then there was I liked the story about CVS and how they stopped selling cigarettes a few years back, and how like certain companies that wouldn't work with them before, like started working with them after that. I thought those were all entertaining, but I thought they all kind of had the same general idea behind them. And I think that was laid out in the first few chapters, and at points it just felt a bit redundant, but it was still entertaining.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think for anyone listening who's interested in reading the book, the first 3 chapters are really, really great. Actually, the first chapter it's a kind of like an overview of the remainder of the book, and then the remainder of the book is like supporting stories, and it's interesting to learn these stories, especially for me. I'm definitely interested in like seeing real life examples and just being more knowledgeable about business practices and learning about businesses in general. But a lot of it is really laid out for you in the first few pages there.
Did anybody like get like this impression from him, this like 2 forces fighting each other? I couldn't get out of my head as I was like going through this book how much that I thought that there's the infinite game is just as important as the finite game, and the good companies actually figure out a way to make them both coexist. And I felt like he always had this like anti-capitalist kind of feel to the way he was talking about like business. And I don't know if that was necessarily his intention, but it certainly seemed that way. And I couldn't help. I kept thinking, like, found myself yelling at when I was listening to it, like, no, like, what do you like, and just the idea that like this infinite game is, like the end all, where I think the purest sense of the infinite game is probably just as evil as the purest sense of the finite game. And I think there probably, in my opinion, is like a coming to the middle, almost like politics. Like you have like these really, really staunch Republicans and really, really staunch, like aggressive liberals, and at the end of the day, maybe it's like, okay, like you have some good ideas, let's talk through this, as opposed to saying like, oh, socialism's bad, capitalism's bad. And, it kind of just like they kind of fight each other. And I just, throughout the book, I got this like real anti-capitalist kind of feeling. Did anyone else like have that kind of like thought about the way he was like his approach?
He weaves it in a little bit, but also I think it's not as simple as just an infinite game. I think there's probably finite games within the infinite game. So it's a book, and I guess he's trying to go over on one side in terms of the message of the infinite game and how that works. But yeah, in reality, it's probably not as simple, as just as outlined as just an infinite game. And also, I mentioned earlier, it's not as simple to implement, I think, as well. But some of the, if you look at it from a pure capitalist, anti-capitalist perspective, I think he does weave some of that in there. It's hard to tell if that's his like stance on it or not, but But yeah, I think there's a little bit of it in there.
I think there's something to be said for like coming to the middle, or like taking, sort of going back to what you were saying, Mark, about worthy rivals, like taking the practices and successes that come from both infinite and finite games and using them both to your advantage when you are a business owner or working for a business. And there's just something to be said for like learning from all different types of perspectives and then putting them to use in your own way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, we're just about out of time. Thank you all for participating in today's conversation. John, what book do you have selected for us next month?
So next month we're gonna talk a little Elon Musk. So there's obviously a lot in the news about these days about Elon, between SpaceX and some of his comments about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And he's just one of those guys. He's like bigger than life, you know. And I thought it'd be an interesting read and something we could certainly have some good discussion around.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I don't think we can get away from him if we try. So
no, we can't.
As well.
Might as well. You can't beat him. Join him.
Yeah.
All right, so that just about wraps up today's show. Thank you everyone for listening in. We'll tune in to next time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.